The scream that tore through the twilight air made Brennan Irwin drop his axe mid-swing and sprint toward the village square before his mind could catch up with his legs. He rounded the corner past the miller's cottage to find a scene that stopped him cold. A young orc woman, barely more than a girl really, stood bleeding in the dirt road while Mayor Aldrich Pendleton raised a torch high, his weathered face twisted with righteous fury. Behind her, at least 24 villagers formed a half-circle, some clutching pitchforks and hammers, others simply gawking with expressions ranging from fear to disgust. The orc girl couldn't have been more than 19 summers. Blood seeped through her torn leather tunic from a gash along her ribs, and her green skin was smudged with dirt and what looked like soot. Her black hair hung in a tangled braid down her back, and despite the tusks protruding slightly from her lower jaw, there was something heartbreakingly vulnerable about the way she held her empty hands up in surrender. Her amber eyes darted from face to hostile face, searching desperately for any sign of mercy. "Please," she said, and her voice cracked on the single word. "I just need shelter for the night. My village was attacked. Raiders came and burned everything. I have been walking for 3 days without food or water. I mean no harm." "No harm," Mayor Pendleton's voice boomed across the square. "Your kind killed my brother 20 years ago during the border wars. Your kind pillaged and burned half the eastern settlements. And now you come here to our peaceful village expecting charity." "I was not even born 20 years ago," the girl said, and despite her exhaustion, there was dignity in her tone. "I have never raised a weapon against any human. I am not asking for much, just somewhere safe to rest until dawn, then I will be gone." Brennan found himself edging closer through the crowd, his heart hammering against his ribs. He had heard stories all his life about orcs, about their savagery and bloodlust, about how they raided human settlements and showed no mercy. But the creature standing before him looked nothing like the monsters from those tales. She looked terrified and hurt and utterly alone. "There is a house," an older woman suddenly called out from near the front of the crowd. "The old Rothwell place at the edge of the village. It has been empty for months since Thomas died. She could stay there for the night." The orc girl's face lit up with desperate hope. "Yes, anywhere. I will even sleep in a barn or stable. Please." Mayor Pendleton seemed to consider this for a long moment, his jaw working as he ground his teeth. Finally, he jerked his head toward the woman who had spoken. "Fine. Martha, show her to the Rothwell house. But she leaves at first light, you understand, and someone will be watching to make sure she does not steal anything or cause trouble." The girl sagged with visible relief, pressing one hand against her wounded side. Thank you so much." Martha, a stout woman with gray streaks in her brown hair, stepped forward and gestured curtly for the orc to follow. The crowd parted reluctantly, people pulling back as if even proximity might contaminate them. Brennan watched as the girl limped after Martha, her steps unsteady, leaving small drops of blood in the dusty street. They had only made it perhaps 20 paces when a door slammed open with such force that several people jumped. A tall, angular man with iron-gray hair stormed out of one of the nicer houses that bordered the square. Brennan recognized him immediately. Jonathan Rothwell, Thomas's younger brother, who had inherited the property when the old man passed. "Absolutely not." Jonathan bellowed, his face flushed red with anger. "That is my brother's house, my family's property, and no filthy orc will set foot inside it." Martha stopped, turning to face him with her hands on her hips. "Jonathan, be reasonable. The girl is injured and exhausted. One night will not hurt anyone." "I said no." He strode past them and planted himself directly in front of the door to the small cottage that sat at the end of the street. "My brother spent 40 years building that home, raising his family there. I will not dishonor his memory by letting an orc pollute it. The girl looked between Martha and Jonathan, her amber eyes wide with confusion and dawning despair. I understand. I will go. I did not mean to cause problems. She turned as if to walk back through the crowd, but her legs gave out halfway through the movement. She collapsed to her knees in the dirt, one hand still clutched against her bleeding side. A low murmur rippled through the gathered villagers, though no one moved to help her. Brennan felt something twist hard in his chest, something that overrode every cautious instinct and bit of common sense his 32 years had taught him. Before he could talk himself out of it, he pushed through the crowd and crouched down beside the girl. "Can you stand?" he asked quietly. She looked up at him with such shock that he might as well have spoken in an ancient tongue. Yes, I think so." He offered his hand, and after a moment's hesitation she took it. Her palm was rough and calloused, the grip stronger than he expected despite her weakened state. He helped haul her to her feet, keeping one hand hovering near her elbow in case she swayed again. "What are you doing, Brennan?" Mayor Pendleton's voice held a warning edge. Brennan turned to face the mayor and the crowd, his jaw set. "She needs help. Look at her. She can barely stand." "What kind of people would we be if we just let her collapse in the street? She is an orc," Jonathan Rothwell spat. "They are not people." The girl flinched as if she had been struck. Brennan felt anger flare hot in his gut, surprising him with its intensity. "She is injured and alone and asking for basic human decency," Brennan said, his voice harder than it had been a moment before. "And last I checked, we pride ourselves on being good, honest folk in this village. Or does that only count when it is easy?" Several people in the crowd looked uncomfortable now, shuffling their feet and avoiding eye contact. Mayor Pendleton's expression darkened. "You are playing a dangerous game, Irwin. Your farm is isolated enough that you might not care about village politics, but the rest of us have to live here together. We have to think about safety and reputation." "My farm," Brennan said slowly, the idea forming even as he spoke it, "is about a mile down the south road. It has a barn with clean hay and a water pump in the yard. She can stay there for the night, and then she can continue on her way in the morning. That way it is not the village's problem, it is mine." The girl turned to stare at him, her amber eyes searching his face as if trying to determine whether this was some kind of cruel trick. "You would do this. Why?" "Because it is the right thing to do," Brennan said simply. He looked back at the mayor. "Is there any law against me offering shelter on my own property?" Mayor Pendleton's mouth pressed into a thin line. "No, but do not expect the village to come running if you find yourself with a knife in your back. I will take that chance." Brennan turned back to the orc girl and softened his tone. "Come on, let's get you somewhere you can rest." She nodded slowly, still looking stunned, and let him guide her away from the crowd. He could feel dozens of eyes boring into his back as they walked down the darkening street, could hear the whispers starting up like a swarm of angry wasps. He ignored them all, keeping his pace slow to match her limping steps. They walked in silence for several minutes, leaving the village behind. The road south was little more than packed dirt with grass growing down the middle, lined on both sides by fields that had already been harvested for the season. The evening air carried the earthy smell of turned soil and the first hints of autumn chill. "Thank you," the girl finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You did not have to do that. I know it will cause you trouble." Brennan shrugged, though she was right. "I am not big on crowds anyway. I farm alone, sell my crops, and mostly keep to myself. A little more disapproval will not change much. Still, you were the only one who helped." She paused, then added, "My name is Gracia, Brennan Irwin, though I guess you heard that already." He glanced at her, taking in the way she kept her left arm pressed tight against her ribs. "How bad is that wound?" "Not deep. A piece of burning wood fell on me when I was trying to escape the fires. It will heal." "Let me be the judge of that. I have some medical supplies in the house, basic stuff, but better than nothing." They walked on as the sun sank lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Brennan's farmhouse came into view, a modest two-room structure with whitewashed walls and a stone chimney. The barn stood about 50 yards away, larger than the house itself, and beyond that stretched field after field of harvested wheat and barley. Gracia stopped at the edge of his property, suddenly hesitant. "The barn is fine. You said you had a barn." "I also said I have medical supplies, and those are in the house." Brennan kept walking, looking back over his shoulder at her. "Come on. I am not going to hurt you, and you are not going to hurt me. Let's just get you patched up." She followed slowly, her eyes darting around as if cataloging possible threats or escape routes. Brennan led her up the 3 wooden steps to his front door and pushed it open, gesturing for her to enter first. The interior was simple but clean. A main room with a stone hearth, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, some shelves holding dishes and supplies, and a doorway leading to what was presumably a bedroom. A lantern hung from a ceiling beam, and Brennan lit it with practiced ease, casting warm light across the space. "Sit," he said, pointing to one of the chairs. "Let me get water boiling and find the bandages." Gracia lowered herself into the chair gingerly, her whole body rigid with tension. She watched his every movement as he worked, clearly ready to bolt at the first sign of danger. Brennan tried to move slowly and deliberately, keeping his hands visible and his voice calm. He got the fire going in the hearth, hung a pot of water over it to heat, then rummaged through a chest until he found clean cloth for bandages, a jar of healing salve his mother had taught him to make, and a bottle of strong spirits for disinfecting wounds. When he turned back to Gracia, she was still watching him with those unsettling amber eyes. "You will need to take off your tunic so I can see the wound properly," he said. She hesitated, then slowly began unlacing the leather vest she wore over a simple cloth shirt. When she lifted the shirt, Brennan hissed through his teeth. The gash ran from just below her ribs to her hip, maybe 6 inches long. It was not terribly deep, as she had said, but it was angry and red and definitely needed cleaning. "This is going to hurt," he warned, wetting a cloth with the warm water and adding a splash of the alcohol. "I have had worse," she said, but her hands gripped the edge of the chair until her knuckles turned pale green. Brennan cleaned the wound as gently as he could, and to her credit, Gracia barely made a sound beyond a few sharp intakes of breath. When he was satisfied it was clean, he smoothed the healing salve over it and wrapped her torso with strips of the clean cloth. "There," he said, stepping back. "That should do it. Keep it dry and change the bandages every day if you can." "I have no other bandages," she said quietly. "Then I will give you some to take with you." He moved to the hearth and ladled some of the hot water into a wooden cup, adding dried herbs to make a simple tea. "Here. Drink this. You said you have not had water in days." She took the cup with both hands and drank deeply, her eyes closing with relief. When she finished, she looked at him again, and this time there was something softer in her expression. "Why are you being so kind to me? You do not even know me." Brennan settled into the other chair, suddenly aware of how tired he was. "I spent 5 years in the border militia when I was younger, saw things, did things that I am not proud of. After I came back, I inherited this farm from my uncle and decided I wanted a quieter life, a simpler life." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I saw orc raiders during those years and they were brutal, but I also saw human soldiers do brutal things. I saw scared kids on both sides who did not want to fight but got caught up in something bigger than themselves. He met her eyes. Point is, I learned that cruelty is not unique to any one people. And I decided that if I ever had a choice between being hard or being kind, I would choose kind, even if it costs me something. Gracia was quiet for a long moment. Your people do not see it that way. To them, we are all the same. All monsters. Some of my people, maybe, not all. Brennan stood and moved to the shelves, pulling down bread and cheese and dried meat. When did you last eat? 4 days ago. He laid the food on the table in front of her. Then eat. There is plenty. She stared at the food like it might disappear if she blinked. Then, with shaking hands, she tore off a piece of bread and began to eat. Brennan watched her for a moment, then turned away to give her some privacy, busying himself with banking the fire and tidying up the medical supplies. When he looked back, she had devoured everything he had set out and was watching him again with that mixture of wariness and confusion. "You can sleep in here by the fire," Brennan said. "I have extra blankets. I will be in the other room, and I promise I will not bother you. In the morning I will pack you some food for the road and you can be on your way." "Where will I go?" The question came out so quietly he almost missed it. "Where were you headed?" She shook her head. "I do not know. I just ran. There is nowhere for me now. My village is destroyed. My family is dead. Other orc clans will not take me in because I am not blood, and clearly human villages do not want me either." The hopelessness in her voice cut through Brennan like a blade. He sat back down across from her, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "What about further north? I have heard there are settlements up that way where humans and orcs trade peacefully. That is at least a month's travel on foot through territory held by hostile clans. I would never make it." She looked down at her hands. "Maybe I should just go back into the wilderness. Live alone. It is better than constantly being afraid that someone will kill me for what I am. That is no way to live. What choice do I have?" Brennan did not have an answer for that. They sat in heavy silence for a while, the crackling of the fire the only sound. Finally, he stood and retrieved the blankets he had promised, laying them out on the floor near the hearth. "Get some sleep," he said. "Things might look different in the morning." He retreated to his bedroom, leaving the door open a crack so he could hear if she tried to leave or if there was trouble. He lay in his narrow bed staring at the ceiling, his mind racing. He kept seeing the look on her face when Jonathan Rothwell had called her filthy, when the crowd had recoiled from her like she carried plague. He kept hearing the resignation in her voice when she talked about living alone in the wilderness. Sleep came eventually, but it was restless and full of unclear dreams. When Brennan woke, pale dawn light was filtering through the small window above his bed. He dressed quickly and emerged into the main room, half expecting to find Gracia gone. Instead, she was sitting up on the blankets, looking out the window at the fields beyond. "Morning," he said. She turned, startled, then relaxed slightly. "Good morning. I hope it is all right that I stayed." "Of course. That was the plan." He moved to the hearth and began building up the fire. "Are you hungry? I usually make porridge for breakfast. I do not want to take more of your food. You are not taking it. I am offering it. There is a difference." He filled a pot with oats and water and hung it over the growing flames. While it cooked, he cut more bread and laid out some early apples from the tree behind the house. They ate in companionable silence, and Brennan found himself studying her when he thought she was not looking. In the morning light, he could see that, beneath the grime and exhaustion, she was striking. Her green skin had an almost luminous quality, and her features, though different from human ones, were well proportioned and strong. The small tusks gave her an exotic appearance rather than a monstrous one, at least to his eyes. When they finished eating, Brennan packed a satchel with food, the extra bandages, and the jar of healing salve. He handed it to Gracia, who took it slowly. "This is too much," she said. "It is what you need to survive. Take it." She slung the satchel over her shoulder, then stood there awkwardly, clearly struggling with what to say. "I do not know how to thank you. What you did, taking me in when everyone else turned me away. I will remember it always. You do not have to thank me. Just stay safe out there." Brennan walked with her to the door, but as he opened it, a thought struck him with unexpected force. "Wait." She paused, looking back at him questioningly. "What if you stayed?" The words tumbled out before he could second-guess them. "Here, I mean, on the farm. I could use help with the work, and you would have shelter and food." Gracia's eyes went wide. "You cannot be serious." "Why not? The farm is isolated enough that you would not have to deal with the villagers except when we go in to trade, and I can handle that. You would be safe here." "Safe until one of your neighbors decides to burn down your fields or worse because you are harboring an orc." She shook her head. "I cannot ask you to risk that. You are not asking. I am offering." Brennan surprised himself with how much he meant it. "Look, I know we just met, and I know this is unusual. But the way I see it, you need somewhere to stay, and I genuinely could use an extra pair of hands around here. The harvest is done, but there is still plenty of work before winter sets in. Fences to mend, the barn roof needs patching, firewood to chop and stack. What would people say? People already think I am strange for living out here alone. Let them talk." He held her gaze. "You said yourself you have nowhere to go. At least here you would have a roof over your head and regular meals while you figure things out. And if it does not work, you can leave any time. No obligations." She searched his face for a long moment, clearly trying to understand his motivations. "Why would you do this?" "You do not owe me anything." "No, I do not. But maybe that is exactly why I want to." He stepped back, giving her space. "Think about it. You do not have to decide right now." Gracia looked out at the fields stretching away toward the horizon, then back at the modest farmhouse. When she spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion. "If I stay, I will work hard. I will earn my keep. I will not be a burden." "I know you will not." Brennan felt something warm unfurl in his chest, something he could not quite name. "So is that a yes?" "Yes," she said, and for the first time since he had met her, she smiled. It transformed her entire face, making her look younger and far less guarded. "Yes, I will stay. For now." Over the following days, Brennan learned that Gracia had not been exaggerating when she said she would work hard. She threw herself into every task he set for her with a determination that bordered on fierce. She hauled water, chopped wood, mended fences, and climbed up on the barn roof to replace damaged shingles despite her healing injury. She worked from first light to dusk, pausing only when Brennan insisted she take breaks to eat and rest. "You are going to hurt yourself," he said on the third day, watching her heft another heavy log onto the growing woodpile. "That wound needs time to heal properly." "It is fine," she said, though he noticed she winced when she stretched. "I am stronger than I look." "I do not doubt that, but strength does not mean much if you tear open your stitches." He took the next log from her hands before she could lift it. "Take a break, I mean it." She looked like she wanted to argue, but finally nodded and sat down heavily on a nearby stump. Brennan fetched water for both of them, and they drank in silence, watching a hawk circle lazily overhead. "Why do you push yourself so hard?" Brennan asked after a while. Gracia did not look at him. "Because I need to prove I am worth keeping around. You do not have to prove anything." "Yes, I do." Her voice was flat. "You took a risk bringing me here. The least I can do is make sure I am useful enough that you do not regret it." Brennan wanted to tell her that her worth was not dependent on how much work she could do, that she deserved kindness and shelter simply by virtue of being a person in need. But he sensed that she would not believe him, not yet, so instead he just said, "Well, you are definitely useful. But you will be a lot less useful if you collapse from exhaustion or reopen that wound. So please pace yourself." She gave him a sidelong look, something almost like amusement flickering in her amber eyes. "You are very stubborn," says the woman who insisted on climbing on the roof 3 days after getting slashed with burning wood. This time she did smile, just a little. Fair point. As the days turned into weeks, they fell into an easy rhythm. Brennan taught Gracia the ins and outs of farm work, and she proved to be a quick study. She had a natural aptitude for working with animals, and the chickens that Brennan had always found skittish seemed to calm around her. Even his ancient draft horse, a gray mare named Maple who was usually indifferent to everyone, developed a fondness for Gracia, whickering softly whenever she appeared. In return, Gracia taught Brennan things she had learned growing up in an orc village. She showed him how to set snares that were far more effective than his clumsy attempts, how to identify edible plants and medicinal herbs that grew wild in the fields and forests, and how to read weather patterns in ways he had never considered. They talked while they worked, tentative conversations at first that gradually grew more comfortable. Brennan learned that Gracia's village had been small and peaceful, focused on farming and trading rather than raiding. She had been training as a healer, learning from the clan's medicine woman when the raiders attacked. She still did not know who had destroyed her home, whether it had been rival orcs or humans seeking revenge for old grievances. "I do not even know if anyone else survived," she admitted one afternoon while they were patching a section of fence. "I ran and I kept running and I did not look back. Maybe that makes me a coward." "That makes you a survivor," Brennan said firmly. "You did what you had to do to stay alive. There is no shame in that." She was quiet for a moment, her hands stilling on the fence post she was tying off. "Do you think about the war, the things you saw? Sometimes. More than I would like." He drove another post into the ground with more force than necessary. "I try not to dwell on it, but it is always there, you know. Like a shadow." "I know," she said softly. They worked side by side until the sun started to set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of red and gold. As they walked back to the house together, tools slung over their shoulders, Brennan realized he had not felt this content in years. The loneliness that had been his constant companion since he had left the militia and taken up farming had eased without him noticing, filled by Gracia's steady presence. It scared him a little, how quickly he had grown accustomed to having her around. Autumn deepened, and the first frost arrived, turning the fields silver in the mornings. Gracia's wound healed cleanly, leaving only a faint scar that she seemed almost proud of. She had gained weight too, her face filling out as regular meals replaced the starvation she had endured. She looked healthier, stronger, more at ease, but the village remained a problem. The first time Brennan brought Gracia with him to trade, it went about as badly as he had feared. They had loaded the wagon with sacks of grain and wheels of cheese that Brennan had spent weeks preparing, and he had warned Gracia to stay close and ignore anything anyone said. But nothing could have prepared either of them for the wave of hostility that met them when they rolled into the village square. People stopped and stared. Conversations died mid-sentence. A woman grabbed her child and pulled him inside, slamming the door. Jonathan Rothwell emerged from his house looking like he wanted to spit. "You actually kept it," he said, making no effort to hide his disgust. "I thought surely you would have come to your senses by now." "Her name is Gracia, and she is here to help me trade," Brennan said evenly, though his hands tightened on the wagon reins. We have grain and cheese, same as always. Is anyone interested, or should we take our business elsewhere? You know nobody wants your goods if they have been touched by orc hands, Rothwell said, but Mayor Pendleton stepped forward, his expression carefully neutral. Now, Jonathan, let us not be hasty. Grain is grain, and Brennan's crops have always been quality. I will buy 3 sacks for the town stores. It was not much, but it was something. A few other villagers, clearly torn between prejudice and practicality, came forward to make small purchases. Gracia stood silently by the wagon the entire time, her face a mask of careful blankness, though Brennan could see the tension in the set of her shoulders. They finished the trading as quickly as possible and left, neither of them speaking until they were well away from the village. I am sorry, Brennan finally said. I knew it would be hard, but that was worse than I expected. It is not your fault, Gracia replied, and you do not need to apologize for the hatred of others. Maybe we should look for other places to trade. There are smaller settlements further out. That is a lot of extra travel for you, so it would be worth it if it meant not dealing with people like Rothwell. He glanced at her. You handled yourself well back there. I know it could not have been easy. She shrugged. I have had worse said to me. At least nobody tried to attack me this time. The casual way she said it made Brennan's chest tighten with anger on her behalf, but he swallowed it down and focused on driving the wagon home. As winter approached, they prepared the farm for the cold months ahead. They insulated the barn, stocked the root cellar with preserved food, and chopped what felt like a mountain of firewood. The work was hard and constant, but there was satisfaction in it, especially doing it together. One evening, as the first snow began to fall, they sat together by the fire after dinner. Brennan was mending a harness while Gracia worked on sewing a new shirt from fabric he had traded for in a settlement 2 days' ride away. The companionable silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackling logs and the whisper of wind against the walls. Can I ask you something? Gracia said suddenly. Of course. Do you ever regret bringing me here, taking me in? Brennan looked up from the leather he was working. No. Not even once. Why would you think that? Because I have made your life more difficult. The villagers treat you differently now. They look at you with suspicion. I have cost you business and reputation. Gracia. He set the harness aside and leaned forward. Listen to me. Yes, some people have been difficult, but you know what I have gained. I have someone to talk to, someone who works beside me and makes this place feel less empty. I have not been this happy in years, and that is because you are here. So no, I do not regret it. Not for a second. She stared at him, her amber eyes reflecting the firelight. You really mean that? Every word. Something shifted in her expression, something vulnerable and hopeful and scared all at once. You are unlike any human I have ever met, Brennan Irwin. I am just myself, he said, suddenly feeling awkward under the intensity of her gaze. Nothing special. That is where you are wrong. They held each other's eyes for a long moment, and Brennan felt something electric pass between them, something he had been trying very hard not to acknowledge for weeks now. He cared about Gracia, had maybe started to care about her from the moment he helped her to her feet in the village square. But this felt like something more, something deeper and infinitely more complicated. He cleared his throat and picked up the harness again, needing something to do with his hands. We should probably get to bed soon. Morning comes early. If she was disappointed by his retreat, she did not show it. Yes, you are right. But as they settled into their separate sleeping spaces, Brennan lying in his bedroom and Gracia on the pallet they had set up for her near the fire, he found himself staring at the ceiling again, unable to stop thinking about the way she had looked at him. This was becoming complicated. Winter settled over the farm like a heavy blanket, bringing with it snow and ice and long dark nights. The work shifted from outdoor labor to indoor maintenance, repairs that could be done in the barn or the house while the wind howled outside. Brennan and Gracia spent more time in close quarters, and the tension between them grew, an unspoken thing that neither seemed willing to name. There were small moments that lingered, their hands brushing when they passed tools, the way Gracia laughed at his terrible jokes, how Brennan found himself watching her when she was absorbed in a task. Once, during a particularly brutal storm, she had nightmares and woke gasping. Brennan had rushed out of his room to find her sitting up on her pallet, shaking. Without thinking, he had sat beside her and let her lean against him until the fear passed. She had fallen asleep with her head on his shoulder, and he had stayed there until dawn, his back aching but unwilling to disturb her. They did not talk about it the next morning, but something had changed. The village remained hostile, but Brennan found other places to trade, small steadings and settlements where people cared more about the quality of goods than the species of who helped produce them. It meant more travel, but it was worth it. Gracia began coming with him on these trips, and he enjoyed showing her new places, watching her eyes light up when she saw something beautiful or interesting. On one such trip, they stopped at a small trading post run by an elderly couple who treated Gracia with casual friendliness, as if there was nothing unusual about an orc woman traveling with a human farmer. The wife, a tiny woman with white hair and a face like a wizened apple, even complimented Gracia on her needlework when she saw the shirt she had made. "You have good hands, dear," the old woman said. "Steady and precise. That is a rare skill." Gracia had blushed, the green of her cheeks darkening, and thanked her quietly. Later, as they rode home in the wagon, she had been unusually quiet. "What are you thinking about?" Brennan asked. "That woman. She was kind. She did not see me as a monster. Because you are not a monster. You never were. I know that in my head, but sometimes my heart has trouble believing it." She looked at him. "Being with you, staying at the farm, meeting people like that woman. It is starting to help. I am starting to believe that maybe I can have a life, not just survival, but an actual life." "You can," Brennan said. "You deserve that." She smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through winter clouds. As the season wore on, Brennan realized with startling clarity that what he felt for Gracia had long since moved past friendship. He was falling in love with her, had probably already fallen if he was being honest with himself. It was there in the way his heart lifted when she smiled, the way he found excuses to be near her, the way he could not imagine this farm without her presence anymore. But he did not say anything. How could he? She was vulnerable, dependent on him for shelter and safety. Confessing his feelings would put pressure on her, might make her feel obligated to reciprocate. And beyond that, there was the simple fact that a relationship between a human and an orc was not just unusual, it was practically unheard of. The prejudice they faced now would be nothing compared to what would come if people thought they were together romantically. So he stayed silent and tried to be content with her friendship. But Gracia was dealing with her own confusion. She had never expected to feel this way about anyone, let alone a human. Growing up, she had been taught that humans were dangerous, untrustworthy, cruel. And then, Brennan had broken every one of those assumptions. He was kind and patient, and treated her with a respect she had never experienced from anyone outside her destroyed clan. She found herself watching him when he worked, admiring the strength in his arms as he chopped wood, the concentration on his face when he repaired something intricate. She liked the sound of his laugh, rare but genuine. She liked the way he looked at her, like she was a person worth seeing. It terrified her. One night in deep winter, a blizzard struck with sudden violence. The wind shrieked like a living thing, and snow piled against the house in massive drifts. Brennan made sure the fire was built up high and checked that they had plenty of wood and food nearby, knowing they might be trapped inside for days. They played cards, an old deck that Brennan had taught Gracia to use, and talked about nothing and everything. The storm raged outside, but inside the small house it was warm and almost cozy. "Tell me about your family," Gracia said during a lull in the game. "Your parents. I know you inherited this farm from your uncle, but you have never talked about them." Brennan set his cards down, his expression growing distant. "My father died when I was 16, farming accident. My mother remarried a few years later, moved to the coast with her new husband. We write sometimes, but we were never close after she left. My uncle took me in, taught me everything about working the land. When he passed 5 years ago, he left me this place. Do you miss them, your parents?" "My father, yes. Every day, my mother." He shrugged. "I do not resent her for finding happiness again, but it is complicated." "Family usually is," Gracia said softly. "I miss my mother most. She was the one teaching me healing. She had gentle hands and a voice that could calm anyone. When the raiders came, she pushed me out through a back window and told me to run. I wanted to stay to fight or help, but she would not let me. The last thing I saw was her turning back toward the flames." Brennan reached across the table and took her hand. "I am so sorry." "I know." She did not pull away. "Sometimes I feel guilty for surviving when she did not. Like I should have done more. Your mother wanted you to live. Honoring that by surviving is not something to feel guilty about." They sat like that for a long time, hands clasped across the table while the storm battered the walls. Eventually, Gracia pulled away gently and they went back to their game, but something had deepened between them, a new level of trust and understanding. The blizzard lasted 3 days. By the time it finally blew itself out, they had talked more than they had in all the previous weeks combined, sharing stories and memories and fears. They learned the small things about each other. How Brennan hated mushrooms but loved berries. How Gracia could not whistle no matter how hard she tried. How they both found thunderstorms soothing. When the sun finally emerged and they could dig themselves out, the world was transformed into a sparkling landscape of white. They worked together to clear paths to the barn and make sure the animals had survived the storm all right. Everything was fine, and as they stood in the yard looking at the pristine snow, Brennan felt overwhelmingly grateful that Gracia had been there with him through it. "That could have been a very lonely 3 days," he said. "It was not lonely at all," she replied, and the look she gave him made his breath catch. But still, neither of them said what they were really feeling. Spring came eventually, as it always did, melting the snow and revealing the muddy earth beneath. The farm came back to life, and with it came the endless work of a new growing season. They plowed fields, planted seeds, repaired winter damage, and fell back into the rhythm of hard physical labor from dawn to dusk. Gracia had been with Brennan for almost a year now, and the changes in her were remarkable. She moved with confidence, laughed easily, and seemed to have finally shed the haunted look that had clung to her when she first arrived. She had become an integral part of the farm, and Brennan could not imagine working it without her. But the village had not forgotten or forgiven. On a warm day in early spring, when Brennan went into town alone to trade for seeds, he found himself cornered by Jonathan Rothwell and 2 other men. "We need to talk, Irwin," Rothwell said, his tone making it clear this was not a friendly conversation. "I am listening," Brennan said warily. "That orc has been on your property for nearly a year now. People are starting to worry. What if she is scouting for a war party? What if she is planning something? She is not planning anything except helping me plant barley. Honestly, Rothwell, do you hear yourself? She is one woman working a farm, not a military threat. You do not know what she really is, one of the other men said. Orcs are savages. They cannot be trusted. Brennan felt his temper flare. Gracia has done nothing but work hard and keep to herself. She has not caused one single problem for anyone. The only people causing problems are you lot, spreading fear and suspicion based on nothing but prejudice. Watch your tone, Rothwell warned. You might think you are independent out there on your farm, but you still need this village, and the village is losing patience with your choices. Is that a threat? It is a warning. Get rid of the orc or there will be consequences. Brennan stepped closer, drawing himself up to his full height. He was not a particularly large man, but he had muscle from years of farm work and a hardness in his eyes left over from his militia days. If you or anyone else tries to hurt Gracia, you will have to go through me. And I promise you, that will not go the way you think it will. He left before they could respond, his heart pounding with anger and something close to fear. The confrontation had been inevitable, he supposed, but it brought home just how precarious their situation was. The farm might be isolated, but they were not completely separate from the world. If the villagers decided to take action, things could get very bad very quickly. When he got home and told Gracia what had happened, she listened with a carefully blank expression. "Maybe I should leave," she said when he finished. "Go north like we talked about before. I do not want you to get hurt because of me." "No," Brennan said firmly. "You are not leaving. This is your home now, same as it is mine. I am not going to let a bunch of small-minded bigots drive you away. Brennan, they could burn down your crops, hurt your animals, hurt you. Let them try." He took her hands in his, holding her gaze. "Gracia, listen to me. I am not afraid of them, and I am not going to abandon you, not now, not ever. You understand?" She stared at him, her amber eyes shining with unshed tears. "Why? Why are you willing to risk so much for me?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with importance. Brennan knew this was the moment, that if he was ever going to be honest about what he felt, it had to be now. "Because I love you," he said, the words tumbling out rough and sincere. "I think I have been in love with you for months now. And I know this is complicated. I know there are 1,000 reasons why this is difficult, but I cannot keep pretending I do not feel this way. You are the most important person in my life, Gracia. More important than the farm, more important than the village's approval. I would give it all up before I would give you up." She made a small sound, half gasp and half sob, and then she was kissing him. Her lips were warm and urgent, and Brennan kissed her back with everything he had been holding inside. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she rested her forehead against his. "I love you too," she whispered. "I have been so scared to admit it, even to myself. But I love you, Brennan. So much it terrifies me." He laughed, shaky with relief and joy. "That makes two of us." They held each other in the middle of the farmhouse, the spring sunlight streaming through the windows, and for that moment nothing else mattered. Not the prejudice, not the danger, not the uncertain future. Just this, just them. But reality had a way of intruding. 2 weeks after Brennan's confrontation with Rothwell, reality came calling in the form of fire. It was just after midnight when Brennan woke to the smell of smoke. He bolted out of bed, already yelling for Gracia, and burst into the main room to find her at the window. "The barn," she said, her voice tight with fear. "It is on fire." Brennan looked out and felt his heart drop. Flames were already licking up the sides of the barn, orange and malevolent against the dark sky. He could hear Maple screaming, the awful sound of a horse in terror. "Get water," he commanded, already running for the door. "As much as you can carry, and stay away from the flames." He did not wait to see if she listened, just ran full tilt toward the burning structure. The heat hit him like a physical force as he got closer, and smoke choked his lungs. He could see figures retreating into the darkness beyond the firelight, at least 3 men, and rage gave him strength. But the horse came first. Brennan grabbed a bucket from near the pump, soaked his shirt and wrapped it around his face. Then he plunged into the barn. The smoke was worse inside, thick and black and suffocating. He could barely see 2 feet in front of him. Maple was in her stall, rearing and kicking at the walls, eyes rolling white with panic. "Easy, girl, easy," Brennan said, his voice muffled by the wet cloth. He fumbled with the stall latch, his hands shaking from adrenaline and fear. The wood was already hot to the touch. Finally, it gave way, and he grabbed Maple's halter, dragging her toward where he hoped the door still was. They burst out into the relatively cool night air, and Brennan led the horse away from the flames before releasing her. She took off at a gallop toward the far field, and he did not blame her. He turned back to see Gracia already working the pump furiously, filling every container they had with water. "The villagers?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "I saw them running. 3 men, like you said." Her face was grim. "We need to stop this from spreading to the house." They worked together with desperate speed, throwing water on the advancing flames, beating at sparks with wet blankets, creating a fire break between the barn and the other structures. The barn itself was beyond saving, already collapsing in on itself with groans of tortured wood, but they might be able to save everything else. It took hours. By the time the last flames were finally extinguished and only smoldering ruins remained, both Brennan and Gracia were covered in soot and ash, their clothes singed and their hands blistered. The first light of dawn was just starting to paint the eastern sky. They stood side by side, staring at the destroyed barn, too exhausted to speak. Everything they had stored there was gone. Tools, feed, supplies they had carefully accumulated over months. It was a devastating loss, and they both knew exactly who was responsible. "Rothwell," Brennan said finally, his voice hoarse from smoke. "It had to be him and his friends. Can you prove it?" "No, they made sure to cover their tracks." He turned to her, taking in the exhaustion on her face, the defeat in her posture. "I am so sorry. This is my fault. I should have been more careful, should have anticipated they would do something like this." "Your fault?" Gracia looked at him incredulously. "Brennan, you have done nothing but defend me, stand up for me, choose me over and over again despite every threat. This is not your fault. This is theirs, the people who are so full of hate they would destroy a man's livelihood to drive away someone they do not even know." "They are not going to stop," Brennan said heavily. "Next time it might be the house, or the fields, or they might come armed. Then what do we do?" Brennan was quiet for a long moment, thinking. Then he straightened his shoulders and looked at her directly. "We go to the village, right now while the ashes are still hot, and we make them face what they have done. That is dangerous. Everything is dangerous now." He took her hand. "But I am not going to hide, and I am not going to run. They tried to drive you away and hurt me in the process. They need to answer for that." They barely stopped to clean the worst of the soot from their faces before hitching Maple, who had wandered back on her own, to the wagon. The ride to the village felt both too long and too short. Brennan's hands were steady on the reins, but his mind raced with what he would say, how he would handle this. The village was just waking up when they arrived. Smoke still clung to their clothes, and they must have looked like they had been through a war. Brennan drove the wagon straight to the mayor's house and pounded on the door until Mayor Pendleton appeared, bleary-eyed and confused. "Brennan, what in the world?" "My barn was burned down last night," Brennan said, his voice carrying across the square. People were starting to emerge from their houses, drawn by the commotion. 3 men set fire to it while we slept. We barely managed to save my horse and keep the flames from spreading to the house and fields." The mayor's expression shifted from confusion to alarm. "Are you certain it was arson? I saw them running, and I know who it was." Brennan raised his voice further, addressing the growing crowd. "Jonathan Rothwell. He threatened me 2 weeks ago, told me to get rid of Gracia or there would be consequences. Well, here are his consequences." Rothwell pushed through the crowd, his face flushed with anger. "You have no proof of that. You are just looking for someone to blame." "I saw 3 men. You have 2 friends you are always with. Want to tell me where you all were last night? Home in bed like any decent person." "Liar." Gracia spoke for the first time, her voice ringing clear and strong. The crowd went silent. "I saw you. I saw your face in the firelight as you ran. You think darkness hides you, but I have orc eyes. I see better in the dark than you ever will." Rothwell's face went pale. "She is lying. You would take the word of an orc over a human." "I would take the word of an honest woman over a coward who burns barns in the night," Brennan shot back. He turned to Mayor Pendleton. "My barn is gone. All my tools, my feed stores, everything I need to work my farm this season. That is not just property damage, it is an attempt to destroy my livelihood, and it is a crime. What are you going to do about it?" The mayor looked deeply uncomfortable, his gaze darting between Brennan, Gracia, and Rothwell. "These are serious accusations, without proof." "The proof is standing right there," Brennan said, pointing at Rothwell. "Look at him. Look at his face. He knows he is caught." "This is ridiculous," Rothwell blustered, but there was something uncertain in his eyes now. "You cannot prove anything." "Maybe not to a legal standard," Brennan admitted, "but I do not need to. Everyone here knows the truth. They know you have been trying to drive Gracia away since the day she arrived. They know you threatened me. They know you hate us enough to do this." He looked around at the assembled villagers. "The question is, are you all going to let him get away with it? Are you going to stand by while someone burns down his neighbor's property because he does not like who they share their home with?" For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Martha, the same woman who had tried to help Gracia that first night, stepped forward. "I believe him," she said. "I have known Jonathan Rothwell for 20 years, and I know he has a mean streak a mile wide. If he did this, he needs to answer for it." "I saw Jonathan and his friends heading out late last night," another voice said. "It was the blacksmith, a burly man named Thomas. Thought it was odd at the time, but I did not think much of it." More voices joined in, people sharing their own observations, their own doubts about Rothwell. The tide was turning, and Brennan could see panic starting to set in on Rothwell's face. "All right, enough." Mayor Pendleton held up his hands. "Jonathan, did you burn down Brennan's barn?" Rothwell looked around wildly, seeing his support crumbling. We were just trying to scare them. We did not think it would spread so fast. It was not supposed to be that bad." The admission hung in the air like a thunderclap. Several people gasped. Martha shook her head in disgust. "You could have killed them," she said. "The fire could have reached the house while they slept. They could have died, all because you could not stand the idea of an orc living peacefully on a nearby farm." "She is an orc," Rothwell shouted, his composure finally shattering. "She does not belong here. None of them belong here. They are animals, monsters, and treating them like they are people is an insult to every human who has died in the wars." "I am a person," Gracia said quietly, but with such conviction that everyone turned to look at her. "I bleed, I hurt, I love, I grieve. I have lost my family and my home. I have been treated with hatred and cruelty by people who do not know me, who have never even tried to know me. But I am still a person. And nothing you do, no amount of hate you carry, will change that." The silence that followed was profound. Brennan moved to stand beside Gracia, taking her hand openly in front of the entire village. She is a person, he repeated. And she is important to me. More important than this village's approval, more important than fitting in or being accepted. If the price of living here means giving her up or allowing her to be terrorized, then I do not want to live here. Mayor Pendleton sighed heavily. Jonathan, you and your friends are going to rebuild Brennan's barn. You are going to replace everything that was destroyed. And you are going to do it without complaint, or I will have you brought up on charges of arson and attempted murder. Do I make myself clear? Rothwell looked mutinous, but several other men were already nodding, stepping forward to volunteer their own time and materials. Not everyone, not even close to a majority, but enough. Enough to show that not all of the village was poisoned by hate. And Brennan, the mayor continued, I apologize. You and Gracia have done nothing wrong, and you should never have been treated this way. Anyone who has a problem with her living on your farm can take it up with me directly from now on. It was not everything Brennan wanted, but it was something. It was a start. They left the village shortly after, riding back to the farm in silence. When they finally arrived and climbed down from the wagon, Gracia turned to Brennan with tears streaming down her green cheeks. You stood up for me, she said. In front of everyone. You did not hide what I am to you. Why would I hide it? Brennan pulled her close, holding her tight. I love you. I'm not ashamed of that. I will never be ashamed of that. She kissed him then, fierce and grateful and full of emotion. When they broke apart, she was smiling despite the tears. What do we do now? She asked. Brennan looked at the ruins of his barn, then at the house and fields beyond. We rebuild, together. We make this place strong enough that no amount of hate can break it. Together, she repeated, and it sounded like a vow. The rebuilding took weeks. True to Mayor Pendleton's word, Rothwell and his friends showed up 3 days later with lumber and tools, their faces sullen but their hands ready to work. Other villagers came too, more than Brennan expected. Some helped out of genuine remorse, others out of obligation, but the effect was the same. A new barn began to rise from the ashes of the old one. Brennan and Gracia worked alongside them, though the atmosphere was tense at first. But slowly, over shared labor and shared meals, some of the ice began to thaw. People saw Gracia working just as hard as anyone, saw how she and Brennan moved together with the ease of a long partnership, and it became harder to hold onto their prejudices. Martha, especially, made an effort. She brought food and helped with the cooking, and she talked to Gracia like she was just another woman, asking about her life and sharing stories of her own. Other women followed her example, tentatively at first, but with growing warmth. The men were slower to come around, but even there, Brennan noticed changes. When Gracia easily lifted a beam that 2 men had been struggling with, there were murmurs of impressed approval. When she suggested a better way to brace the roof, and it worked perfectly, people listened. She was proving herself through her actions, and while it should not have been necessary, Brennan was proud of her for doing it anyway. Rothwell remained hostile, but he kept his head down and his mouth shut, working grimly until the barn was finished. When it was done, he left without a word, and Brennan did not see him again for months. With the barn rebuilt and summer in full swing, life settled into a new normal. The farm flourished under their combined efforts, the crops growing tall and green under the warm sun. Brennan and Gracia worked hard during the day and spent their evenings together, sometimes talking, sometimes sitting in comfortable silence, sometimes exploring the physical side of their relationship with careful tenderness. Gracia had been nervous the first time they made love, worried that the differences between their bodies would make things awkward or difficult. But Brennan had been patient and gentle, and they had figured it out together, learning what brought each other pleasure. building a physical intimacy that matched the emotional bond they had already forged. Afterwards, lying tangled together in Brennan's bed, Gracia had traced the scars on his chest from his militia days. "You ever regret how your life turned out?" she asked. "If you had stayed in the militia, maybe become an officer, you could have had an easier life, more respect." "I never wanted respect," Brennan said, capturing her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. "I wanted peace. I wanted to build something instead of destroying things, and I wanted to be with someone who saw me for who I really am, not what I used to be or what I could become." "You give me all of that. You give me a home," she replied softly. "You gave me back my life. I will never forget that. You do not owe me anything, Gracia. What we have, it is not about debt. It is about choice. I choose you every single day, and I hope you choose me too." "Always," she promised. "I will always choose you." As summer gave way to autumn, they harvested their crops and found them more abundant than any season Brennan could remember. The new barn was sturdy and well built, and they filled it with grain and hay and supplies for the winter. They had chickens again, and Brennan bought 2 young cows to start building up a herd. More importantly, the hostility from the village had faded to a sort of wary acceptance. People still stared sometimes, and there were those who refused to deal with them, but there were also those who greeted them by name when they came to trade, who asked after the farm and seemed genuinely interested in the answers. It was not perfect, but it was better than it had been. One crisp evening in late autumn, after the harvest was in and they were sitting together watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors, Brennan turned to Gracia. "Marry me," he said. She looked at him, startled. "What? Marry me?" "I know it is not traditional. I know there are not many who would recognize a marriage between a human and an orc, but I do not care about that. I want you to be my wife. I want to build a life with you that is official and recognized and permanent. So marry me." Gracia was silent for so long that Brennan started to worry he had made a terrible mistake, that he had pushed too far too fast. But then she smiled, that beautiful smile that transformed her whole face. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you, Brennan Irwin. Nothing would make me happier." They married a month later in a simple ceremony on the farm. Mayor Pendleton agreed to officiate, and Martha and the blacksmith Thomas stood as witnesses. It was small and quiet, with none of the elaborate celebration that usually accompanied weddings, but it was perfect. Brennan wore his best clothes, and Gracia wore a dress that Martha had helped her sew, simple white cloth that set off her green skin beautifully. They stood together under the bare branches of the oak tree near the house and said their vows, promising to love and honor each other for all the days of their lives. When Brennan kissed his new wife, he felt complete in a way he had never experienced before. This strange, unconventional woman had become the center of his world, and he could not imagine his life without her. The handful of guests who had come shared a simple meal with them, and there was laughter and genuine warmth. Even some of the villagers who had been most hostile in the beginning had softened enough to send small gifts. A new cooking pot, a pair of warm blankets, a wheel of aged cheese. As the sun set and their guests departed, Brennan and Gracia stood alone in the doorway of their home, arms around each other. "This is really our home now," Gracia said. "Not just yours, but ours, together." "It always was," Brennan replied. "From the moment I brought you here, this was as much yours as mine. The wedding just made it official." She laughed and pulled him inside, closing the door on the world. Whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them together. They had already survived so much: prejudice, violence, loss, fear. They had found each other against all odds and built something real and lasting. Winter came again, and this time it felt different. The house was warmer, the days less lonely. They worked together to keep the farm running, and on the coldest nights they stayed close by the fire, telling stories and making plans for the spring. Gracia talked about maybe expanding their garden to include more medicinal herbs, using the healing knowledge she had learned from her mother. Brennan mentioned that he had always wanted to try keeping bees, though he had no idea how to start. They dreamed together about the future, about children maybe, though they had no idea if such a thing was even possible between humans and orcs. It did not matter. What mattered was that they had each other. One afternoon in midwinter, there was a knock on their door. Brennan opened it to find a young orc man standing there, maybe 20 years old, with the same green skin and tusks as Gracia. He looked travel-worn and nervous. "I am sorry to bother you," he said, "but I heard there was an orc woman living here. I am looking for my cousin. Her name is Gracia. Our village was destroyed almost 2 years ago, and I have been searching for survivors ever since." Gracia appeared behind Brennan, her hand flying to her mouth. "Corvan, is that really you?" The young man's face lit up with joy and relief. "Gracia, you are alive. I have been looking everywhere," they embraced, both of them talking rapidly in the orcish language that Brennan had only heard snippets of before. He stepped back to give them space, watching as they clung to each other and cried. Eventually, they switched back to the common tongue, and Gracia pulled Corvan inside, immediately setting about getting him food and water. The story Corvan told was both heartbreaking and hopeful. He had been out hunting when the raiders attacked, and had returned to find everything destroyed. He had found 3 other survivors, and together, they had been traveling, searching for other members of their scattered clan. They had heard rumors of an orc woman living peacefully with a human farmer, and Corvan had broken off from the group to investigate. "There are others?" Gracia asked, her eyes shining. "How many?" "8 that I know of, maybe more scattered. We have been trying to find each other, maybe form a new settlement somewhere safe." Corvan looked at Brennan cautiously. "Is it true that you took her in, protected her?" "I did," Brennan confirmed. "And married her actually." Corvan's eyes went wide. "Married, a human and an orc." "It happens," Gracia said, taking Brennan's hand. "When 2 people care for each other enough to look past what they are supposed to be and see who they really are." Corvan was quiet for a moment, processing this. Then he smiled. "Then you are my cousin by marriage, I suppose." "It is good to meet you, Brennan." They talked long into the night, sharing news and memories. Corvan stayed for 3 days, and during that time, Brennan and Gracia discussed the situation at length. Finally, they made a decision. "Bring the others here," Brennan said. "Not to the farm necessarily, but to this area. There is unclaimed land to the north, past my property. If your people wanted to settle there, start a new village, they would have neighbors who would not immediately try to drive them out." "Are you certain?" Corvan asked. "That would put you in an awkward position, acting as a go-between for our people and the humans." "Someone has to build bridges," Gracia said. "Why not us? We have already proven it can work." And so it began. Corvan returned to his group with the news, and within 2 months, 8 orcs arrived and began building a small settlement on the northern land. It was not easy. There were tensions and difficulties, and more than a few conflicts with suspicious human neighbors. But Brennan and Gracia served as mediators, translators, and examples of what was possible. Slowly, very slowly, trade began between the orc settlement and the human villages. The orcs had skills and goods the humans needed, and vice versa. Children from both communities, who had not yet learned to hate, played together under watchful eyes. Friendships formed, tentative and fragile but real. It took years. There were setbacks and moments when it seemed like everything would fall apart. But gradually, something new emerged. A community that spanned the divide between species that proved cooperation was possible. Brennan and Grasher remained at the heart of it, their farm becoming a neutral meeting ground where both humans and orcs felt welcome. They prospered, not just materially but in the richness of their lives and relationships. 5 years after that first night when Brennan had broken down the door that was barred against Grasha, she gave birth to their first child. The baby was a miracle, a little girl with skin that was lighter than Grasha's but distinctly green, with small tusks and pointed ears and her father's brown eyes. They named her Mira, and she was the first of her kind that anyone knew of, the first child born of human and orc parents. She was healthy and strong and absolutely adored by both communities. If anyone had objections to her existence, they kept them to themselves, because by then, Brennan and Grasha had proven themselves too valuable, too respected, to be challenged lightly. Standing on his porch one summer evening, watching Mira toddle around the yard while Grasha kept a careful eye on her, Brennan thought back to that desperate girl who had collapsed in the village square so long ago. He thought about the choice he had made, the door he had broken down in every sense, the risks he had taken. He had been given 100 reasons to turn away, to protect himself, to choose the easier path. And he had rejected every single one in favor of doing what was right, what was kind, what his heart told him was true. It had cost him something, certainly. The village would never fully accept him as one of their own again. There were still people who looked at his family with suspicion or disgust. He would always be the man who chose an orc over his own kind, but he had gained so much more than he had lost. He had gained love, real and deep and unshakable. He had gained a family. He had gained the knowledge that he had made a real difference, that his choices had created ripples that changed the world around him for the better. Grasha came to stand beside him, slipping her hand into his. Mira had spotted a butterfly and was chasing it with shrieks of delight, her little legs pumping. "What are you thinking about?" Grasha asked. "How lucky I am," Brennan said simply. "How grateful I am that you collapsed in that village square on that particular night, and that I was there to see it." "I am grateful too," she said, "for everything, for your courage, your kindness, your love. You gave me back my life, Brennan. You gave me a future when I thought I had none." "We gave each other a future," he corrected. "This was not just me saving you. You changed my life just as much as I changed yours. You made me better, made me braver, made me believe that one person really can make a difference." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching their daughter play, watching the sun set over the fields they had planted together, over the community they had helped build. It was not perfect. There were still problems to solve, prejudices to overcome, bridges yet to be built. But it was theirs, this life they had created, built on a foundation of one person choosing to break down a door when everyone else wanted it to stay closed, choosing compassion over fear, love over hate. And that, Brennan thought, was worth more than all the approval and acceptance in the world. Years would continue to pass, bringing new challenges and joys. Mira would grow up strong and confident, a bridge between two worlds. She would have siblings eventually, each one another miracle, another proof that differences could be overcome. The settlement to the north would grow into a proper village, with trade routes and festivals and an identity all its own. Brennan and Grasha would grow old together, their hair graying, their hands weathered by decades of work. But the love between them would never fade, never diminish. If anything, it would deepen, becoming something so fundamental to who they were that neither could imagine existence without the other. And when people asked their children and grandchildren about how it all started, about how the human and orc communities learned to live together, the answer was always the same. It started with a closed door, and one man brave enough to break it down. It started with a choice to see a person instead of a monster, to offer kindness instead of cruelty. It started with Brennan and Gracia, two people who should never have met, should never have fallen in love, but who did anyway, and in doing so, changed the world. That night, after Mira was asleep and the farm was quiet, Brennan pulled Gracia close in their bed. "I love you," he said, words he had spoken thousands of times but which never lost their meaning. "I love you too," she replied, settling against his chest, "now and always." And in the small farmhouse, surrounded by fields they had planted and a community they had helped build, they fell asleep together, content in the life they had made and the love they shared. It was, by any measure, a happy ending. Not a perfect one, because life is never perfect, but real and true and earned through struggle and sacrifice, and the simple, revolutionary act of choosing love over fear. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.